Imagine walking onto like a completely frozen Alaskan river in the dead of winter.
Oh, wow. Okay. Coal.
Yeah, freezing. And to your right, you see a university scientist, and they're setting up this motorized auger, drilling core samples to measure, the exact thickness of the ice.
Right. Standard field science.
Exactly. But then to your left, there's a local elder. And they're just walking along the ice, occasionally hitting it with a heavy wooden stick, just listening to the sound it makes.
Hmm.
So the question is, who is actually using the more rigorous method to test the environment?
I mean, the answer to that completely shifts how you think about knowledge.
It really does. And welcome, by the way, to today's deep dive. We are so glad you are joining us for this. Today, our stack of sources includes educational frameworks, scientific curricula, and specifically the official cultural standards for Alaska students.
Which are just absolutely fascinating to read through.
They really are. And our core mission today is to unpack Alaska Cultural Standard A6.
Right. The one about living the values.
Yes. The expectation that students don't just, memorize cultural values for a multiple choice history test, but that they actually live them, that they integrate these traditions into their everyday behavior.
And that shifts everything, right?
Yeah.
Because we are so accustomed to viewing culture as something ornamental, like a dance you watch once a year or a traditional dish you try.
Or some artifact sitting quietly behind museum glass.
Exactly. We rarely consider culture as a hard functional tool used to actually survive and navigate the physical world. But Standard A6 asks us to see culture as a living, systematic practice.
Right.
It asserts that cultural values aren't just beliefs people discuss during special ceremonies. They become visible through, well, repeated everyday choices.
Okay, let's unpack this, because
Fine.
saying living your values sounds amazing on like a motivational poster.
Yeah, very inspirational.
Right. But I want to know what that actually looks like on a random Tuesday. What's
Right.
the difference between simply stating that a value matters and, actually acting as though it matters?
Well, the sources draw a pretty sharp line here. And it mostly comes down to the difference between following a rule and understanding your responsibility.
Okay. Walk me through that.
To really grasp this, we have to talk about the indigenous principle of relationality.
Relationality.
Yeah. Across many Alaska native cultures, humans, animals, plants, the whole landscape, they aren't viewed as a hierarchy where humans just sit at the top.
What we usually think of it.
Right. Instead, they're viewed as an interconnected web of more than human relatives.
Wait, really? More than human relatives? I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Are we saying that if I view a river as a relative, my behavior toward it actually changes fundamentally?
Absolutely it does.
Mm.
Let's look at the Yupik tradition regarding hunting, for example. In a typical Western framework, an animal might be viewed strictly as a resource, right?
It's just calories.
Yeah, just food. But in this indigenous framework, animals are recognized as conscious beings. They have their own spiritual essences.
Okay, so they have agency.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Because they possess agency, a successful hunt isn't about human dominance or skill alone. It's about the animal willingly offering itself to the hunter.
Wait, hold on. How does an animal offer itself? Because I feel like if I'm an outsider looking at hunting, it just looks like a purely physical act. You track the animal, you shoot it, you harvest it. Where does the offering part come into the, everyday action?
It manifests in the preparation and the aftermath.
Yeah.
The belief is that an animal will only offer itself if the hunter demonstrates profound respect.
What does that look like practically?
In everyday terms, it means the hunter has to use meticulously clean gear. They must completely prevent waste. They have to utilize every possible part of the harvest.
Okay, so the visible action is just careful butchering and cleaning.
Right. But the underlying reason, the responsibility, is to honor the animal's spirit so it will return in future seasons.
I see. But let me push back on that a little bit.
Go for it.
Because the sources also mention this practice of returning salmon carcasses to the water or the land after they've been harvested.
Mm-hmm. Cosmological cycling.
Right. And from a modern, sanitary perspective, I can hear people arguing, isn't that just polluting the water? Doesn't throwing fish guts around just attract bears to where people are working?
Oh, sure. That's a very common reaction.
So how does traditional knowledge justify putting rotting fish back into the ecosystem? Why is that a responsibility?
That is a perfect example of where a surface-level view just completely misses the deep machinery of the practice.
How so?
Well, to an outside observer, it looks like a waste disposal problem.
Mm-mm.
But the traditional practice is driven by a responsibility tied to what they call cosmological cycling.
Meaning the rebirth of the salmon.
Exactly. By returning the remains to the water, you are spiritually and physically facilitating the salmon's rebirth. You are literally ensuring the cycle continues.
And what's absolutely wild to me here is how cosmological cycling maps flawlessly onto modern biology.
Oh, it really does.
Like, the sources point out that this traditional practice is the exact same mechanism as the Western ecological concept of nutrient cycling. Those decaying, post-spawning salmon carcasses break down, and they release massive amounts of marine-derived nitrogen and phosphorus into the freshwater streams.
Which acts as fertilizer.
Right. And that feeds the macroinvertebrates, which then in turn feed the next generation of salmon fry.
It's brilliant. The indigenous practice and the Western biological model are describing the exact same life-sustaining loop. They're just using different vocabularies.
Wow.
And if you ban people from putting the carcasses back because of, a narrow interpretation of pollution,
You actually starve the watershed.
exactly, you collapse the future fish population.
That makes me think about what happens when convenience conflicts with responsibility.
Yeah, that's the real test.
Let me offer an analogy to sort of clarify this difference between a rule and a responsibility for the listener.
Sure, let's hear it.
Think about doing the dishes in a shared apartment. If you do the dishes just because your roommate made a strict chore chart and you don't want them to yell at you,
That's a rule.
right, you're following a rule. It's just compliance. And the moment that roommate goes out of town, what happens?
The dishes pile up in the sink.
Exactly, because the external pressure is gone.
There's no internal anchor driving the behavior.
Right. But if you're married and you wake up early to do the dishes because you love your spouse and you know they're stressed at work,
Mm-hmm.
and you just want them to come downstairs to a peaceful, clean kitchen,
Yeah.
that is a responsibility based on relationship.
You do it whether they're watching or not.
Yes. The physical action scrubbing a plate is the exact same in both scenarios, but the internal engine driving it is completely different.
That internal engine is everything.
Mm.
And actually, this brings up a massive caution flag raised in all the curriculum guides we reviewed today.
Oh, what's the caution flag?
Well, because true responsibility requires understanding the why behind an action, there's a real danger in people trying to just copy visible cultural traditions without understanding the local context.
Oh, we're talking about pan-indigenization, right? I read that section and it seems like a very common mistake.
It is a critical error.
Yeah.
Pan-indigenization is basically the tendency to treat all indigenous cultures, or in this case, all Alaska Native cultures, as a single homogeneous group.
Like they're all exactly the same.
Right. But Alaska is massive. I mean, you have temperate rainforests, boreal forests, tundra, coastal marine environments,
So the ecosystems are totally different.
wildly different.
Yeah.
And therefore, the traditions and ecological management systems vary wildly too.
So you can't just take a cultural practice that works in one place and teach it universally.
Exactly. You cannot take, say, coastal Tlingit, clan-based salmon management from the temperate rainforests of Southeast Alaska and just drop it into an interior Athabascan community on the Yukon River.
It wouldn't make any sense.
It misrepresents the knowledge
Yeah.
because that knowledge was born from and is specifically calibrated to a particular place.
The sources give a really vivid example of this with the harvest of something called alec.
Oh, yeah, the mouse food.
Right. If I understand correctly, these are carbohydrate-rich sedge roots, and they're gathered from the caches built by tundra voles.
Yes, that's right.
Now, if I'm an outsider and I just observe the visible tradition, I might think, okay, the cultural practice is to go dig up mouse caches to get roots.
Uh-oh.
So I just grab a shovel, I find a cache, and I completely empty it out. What is wrong with that picture?
Well, ecologically speaking, you've just sentenced that vole to death by starvation.
Yikes.
Yeah. You copied the physical action, but you completely missed the cultural value regulating it. If you engage with that practice respectfully, under the guidance of local knowledge, you learn there are strict protocols.
What do those protocols look like in practice?
First, you only harvest in late autumn, at a very specific time in the freeze-thaw cycle.
Okay.
Second, you never take the whole cache. You only ever take a portion so the vole has enough to survive the winter.
That makes sense.
And crucially, this is the most important part, you leave a symbolic but nutritionally viable gift in return. Something like dried fish or seeds.
Which totally shifts the dynamic.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, because the visible action of just taking the roots without the context, that's just extraction, it's theft. But the actual tradition, driven by the value of reciprocity, transforms that harvest into an act of mutual survival. You are quite literally coexisting with the vole.
What's fascinating here is how this concept of reciprocity isn't limited to just human-animal interactions.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if we pivot from ecological harvesting to, like, interpersonal community life,
Yeah.
we see these exact same values operating in how people treat their human neighbors.
I was wondering about that. How do these cultural values manifest when we're just talking about human-to-human everyday behavior?
Well, in a lot of Western frameworks, we tend to treat things like generosity, hospitality, or patience as just personal preferences.
Right. Like, oh, I'm just a generous person.
Exactly. Or, I feel like being helpful today. It's viewed as a personality trait. But the Alaska cultural standards frame these behaviors not as traits, but as relational obligation.
Relational obligations. So it's required.
Yes. They are structural requirements for the community to function.
So it's not a mood, it's a survival mechanism.
Beautifully put, yes.
The sources talk about the Chugach region, specifically communities like Nanolek and Port Graham. They have this deep tradition of sharing harvested food, like moose.
Yes, which is called teglit in the Sugsdestone or Alutiiq language.
Tiglit. Right. And if a hunter brings down a moose, they don't just, pack their own freezer and call it a day.
Right. And it's vital to understand that sharing teglit is not viewed as charity.
That's a really important distinction. How is it different from charity?
Well, charity implies a hierarchy, doesn't it? A giver who has excess and a receiver who has a deficit.
Like pity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But sharing teglit is a highly structured, cooperative economic network. The distribution of that harvest ensures that the entire community survives the winter.
Wow.
A hunter's individual success literally has no cultural meaning unless it contributes to the collective resilience of the group. Generosity isn't just nice, it is the social safety net.
And it isn't just about sharing physical resources like meat either. It's also about how people share space and time and knowledge.
Very true.
I was really struck by the curriculum guide's notes on patience and listening.
Oh, that section is so good.
Right. In Inupiat and Yupik traditions, how does a young person learn a really complex, dangerous task? Let's say navigating sea ice or safely loading a hunting boat so it doesn't capsize.
What would you normally expect?
Well, I would assume they ask a million questions and the teacher gives them a long lecture. That's how we do it in school.
Actually, it's quite the opposite. They learn through a pedagogy of quiet observation.
Quiet observation.
Yeah. A young person might watch expert hunters for years before they actively participate or even ask a verbal question.
See, if I'm a typical Western educator observing that, I might look at a student sitting silently for hours and think, uh-oh, they are disengaged. They aren't participating.
Which is such a Western bias.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see how flawed that assumption is. That silence is highly active. The student is internally modeling the process. They are watching the variables, the wind, the water tension, the weight distribution in the boat.
Taking it all in.
Exactly. They are understanding the deep patterns of cause and effect long before they ever test it with their own hands. It's a rigorous, empirical process, and it requires the student to practice deep humility and respect for the knowledge holder.
It's literally the scientific method just playing out internally.
Precisely.
But this raises a really tricky question for you, the listener. If these protocols are so complex and so deeply tied to specific local contexts and quiet observation, how do outsiders participate respectfully?
That's the big question.
Whether they're students, researchers, or just new neighbors. How do we learn without accidentally acting like an authority on a culture that isn't ours?
And that right there is the line between cultural appreciation and cultural extraction.
Mm-hmm.
The sources are definitive on this. You cannot treat generalized summaries or even this very deep dive we're doing right now as the ultimate authority.
Right. You have to learn from appropriate local sources.
Yes.
And by local sources, the texts specifically emphasize the role of elders. But I want to clarify something here, because I think there's a misconception that elder just means anyone over the age of 65.
Oh, yeah. That is a very common misunderstanding. Within these communities, an elder is not defined merely by chronological age.
Okay, so how are they defined?
An elder is someone explicitly recognized by their peers for their cultural wisdom, their lived integrity, and their ability and willingness to pass on traditional values accurately.
So they're essentially the vetted, peer-reviewed experts of their communities.
Exactly. That's a great way to phrase it.
And when we bring that local vetted expertise together with Western science, we get this incredible framework that the sources call two-eyed seeing.
Yes, or etuatbunk.
Etuatmink. I am obsessed with this concept. Can you break down how two-eyed seeing actually works in practice?
Definitely. Two-eyed seeing involves looking at the world with one eye focused on the strengths of indigenous knowledge and the other eye focused on the strengths of Western science.
Using both eyes together.
Right. And crucially, it does not ask indigenous knowledge to, prove itself using Western metrics. It recognizes both systems as equal, rigorous, and complementary partners.
Which brings us all the way back to the hook of our show today, the two people on the frozen river.
Ah, yes, the ice testing.
How does two-eyed seeing apply to testing that ice thickness?
Well, if you rely only on a thermometer or even a drilled core sample from the scientist, you're only getting one specific data point.
Right, at that exact spot.
But traditional knowledge utilizes a completely different sensory mechanism. When the elder hits the ice with a wooden stick, they are listening to the acoustic resonance of the river.
The sound of the ice.
Yeah. Solid, safe, clear ice rings with a high pitch. Honeycombed, decaying, unsafe ice gives this dull thud.
So if a researcher goes out there and ignores the elder because they think, hitting the ice with a stick isn't real science.
They are actually putting their entire team in danger.
Wow.
By ignoring a highly localized, deeply empirical data set. In fact, the curriculum guides note that it is considered a severe protocol violation to conduct cold weather field work without verifying safety through those traditional checks.
Because engaging respectfully means understanding that local knowledge keeps you alive.
It literally does.
It also means understanding interpersonal protocols, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The sources mention that if an elder visits your classroom or your research site, you don't just hand them a microphone, hit record, and start extracting data.
No. You must create an environment of hospitality first.
What does that entail?
You bring small gifts. You offer them tea. You establish a human relationship before any knowledge is exchanged.
So, synthesizing all of this, engaging respectfully really means asking questions before you act. It means focusing heavily on listening rather than talking. And above all, it means ensuring that any interaction is a two-way street.
Yes. You cannot take knowledge without offering something in return.
Whether that's sharing your research data back with the community, offering physical assistance, or simply showing profound respect.
It's that core value of reciprocity again. Whether you are dealing with a tundra vole, a salmon watershed, or a community elder, the relational obligation is the exact same.
We have covered so much fascinating ground today. We started by basically shattering the display case and taking culture out of the museum.
It's out in the open now.
Yeah, we've seen that cultural values aren't static. They are alive and actively negotiated every single day.
Because people practice them.
Right. Whether it's sharing a moose harvest to keep the community fed, testing the pitch of river ice to keep people safe, or leaving a gift of seeds in the tundra.
And if we truly internalize this, that culture is a daily living practice, it holds up a mirror to our own lives.
It really does.
It forces you to look at your mundane, everyday choices and realize that they are your cultural values made visible.
Which is exactly where I want to leave you, the listener, today. Building on the mission of Standard A6, I want to invite you to take a moment today and look closely at your own daily routine.
Just one thing.
Notice just one value that you already practice without even thinking about it. Maybe it's how you return borrowed equipment or how you acknowledge the person who taught you a specific skill. And then I want you to identify one place where you could bring your actions into closer alignment with the deeper values of your own community. Where is there a rule in your life that you could transform into a responsibility?
I love that.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to unpack another stack of sources and figure out how the world works together. Until then, keep observing, keep asking questions, and keep living those values.